Hello, folks, and welcome to Pete and John Talk Fishing, brought to you by our friends at Amsoil. And Pete, we're getting into that August time of year now, and early September, and the hot weather, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about muskie fishing today. Before we get there, you look at the dog days of August. There's still a lot of great opportunities in the Midwest. One of my favorites is the king salmon start coming into the shorelines along Lake Michigan. And you know how much I enjoy that, right? The jigging for the kings.
Oh yeah, and those things fight, right? It's
Yeah,
tough to beat that
absolutely.
battle.
And that gets really good in August and runs all the way through September. Good news for you, Pete. The walleyes are biting like crazy on the Bay of Green Bay, off of Ocano and Peshtigo. They're catching big perch on the Mississippi River right now. You just got to be careful where you pick to go this time of year. For all species, you got to go to places where I think you've got an opportunity for cooler water temps or big water for the other species, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Fortunately, the temps haven't been super hot yet, and it's hard to predict exactly, obviously, what's going to come in the coming months. But it's been pretty cool. But you definitely want to seek out cool, and Lake Superior is another real good option. I hear the walleye bite is going pretty good up there, and that just tends to stay quite cool in general. The one thing, just in general, too, I want to offer for this time of the year, obviously, the warmer the water temps get for all species, the more you got to be careful. But generally, when the fish that are in the open water are suspending deeper this time of the year. So I just, regardless of the species, might be walleyes, might be muskies, might be northern pike. Could be smallmouth bass, could be just about anything. But other than species that are good at burping, you still don't want to target deep fish. So you just want to avoid the fish that are hanging lower. In a lot of cases now in the inland lakes, you're getting thermoclines developing, and that's where a lot of the fish are going to hang this time of the year. They're not in that top 15 feet that we normally talk about for June, springtime. So those fish, essentially, I just recommend that people leave them alone. And there's still plenty weed fish this time of the year, shallow structure fish, and some on some of the deeper bars, bars that top off at 20 feet and stuff like that. It's still pretty safe to fish for those fish. Always kind of try not to force them up to the top quickly, but and obviously time out of the water is critical. Try and get them right back in for release fish.
Yeah, real quick before we get into the muskies too, I want to say I was up north last week and I was fishing a lake that I haven't fished a lot, and water temps were, oh gosh, I would say low to mid 70s, and I was still finding a lot of fish in that 8 to 15 feet of water on the weed edges and on top of the rock humps. I caught walleyes, I caught smallmouth, and I caught pike, all in those depths. So I
Yeah.
think it's like if you take your boat, run along that weed edge, and if you're seeing bait, there's going to be game fish around, right?
Oh, absolutely, and I totally agree. I mean, I've been fishing on and off with my dad Tex, and we've been chasing, just whatever bites kind of thing, walleye, bass, crappie, up here too, and that remains, frankly, even if it gets real hot. And fortunately, it hasn't so far this year, but there's always weed fish, John. There really always
Right.
is on the structures. I've been kind of amazed at times to find walleyes and stuff in some pretty shallow water, even when you get up into the high 70s and 80s. So those fish are always there. They can be tougher to catch weather-wise on certain days, but they're there. It's not like you have to go target the open water fish that are hanging in the thermocline to find fish. There's still fish that just prefer that structure. There's always bait fish there. Smallmouth are a little bit deeper than they had
Mm-hmm.
been, but they're still fairly shallow. I mean, we've been catching them in 12 to 16 lately. So, there's a lot of fish to be found near structure.
Well, one last tip too, fishing a strange lake for me. I'm glad I picked up all the knowledge from you over the years. Before I even put a line in the water, I drove around the lake real slow and found some weeds, and even the 2D sonar. I was able to mark some smallmouth on the rock bars. But before I even started fishing, I did a little scouting, and that's what you've done over the years. You might even go a day early and just troll to check out the different structures.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on bigger water, trolling's a good idea for, regardless of species, just to check out your bait fish, where your thicker weeds are in a lot of cases for muskies and crappies and whatever. I've found a lot of patterns with certain weed types and certain species this year. So you want to be looking for all of that. And frankly, electronics wise, John, one of the best tools that's really kind of sped up that process. From fishing with me, I've been doing that for years on big water, checking. Some days I just run around. I go over to St. Clair and just run my boat at full speed, trying to find patches of weeds. But now with that side imaging, the hummingbird is
Yeah.
it's so neat. And of course you can obviously, when you see a real thick patch and when you get good with your side imaging, you can tell the weed type. You can obviously see if there's fish there, but then you can immediately drop a waypoint. So you're covering so much more water. I don't know how many times I'm looking. The only thing it can be confusing because there's a fish crib on this side of me that I'm marking. I go, oh, I didn't know that one's there, and there's weeds
Yeah.
on the other side of me. So you're really able to find out a lot with regard to scouting very quickly.
Well, to expound on that a little bit, I mean, you and I have fished big lakes in Minnesota for many, many years. And like I said earlier, you'll run, some of the weed edges are 3, 4 miles long, and you'll run those before you even start fishing. What are you looking for? You're looking for weed points or what?
Well, you're looking for weed type changes, and then just in general thicker patches and bottom composition changes. It's definitely. I mean, when it's that long that you're talking about, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world to set some higher baits so you're not getting messed up. You don't want to be getting snagged all the time if you
Right.
make a mistake and get in a little too tight to the weeds, because then you're really not covering much water. But set some high baits. You always got a chance of catching a fish, and then yeah, weed type changes, and then bottom content. In a lot of cases, you'll get a combination of harder bottom, could be sand, could be gravel, maybe even some boulders. If that coincides with a weed patch, then if you've got a long stretch of weeds, you get that combination. All of a sudden, you've got a hot spot there. There's just no doubt about it when you've got that. And again, when you get good with the side imaging, you can see the differences. You may not even know for sure what type of weeds you're transitioning species to species, but again, if it's a transition to a different weed type, it's generally a zone you want to target. And bringing in the old-fashioned electronics, I guess, to a certain extent, in a lot of cases, you'll see patterns for that as well, where on a sunny day anyway, the polarized glasses really come into play, because you can literally be casting perfectly from your vision. You're able to see that weed type change, or that change from the weeds to the sand, or whatever it might be. You can pick that area and literally direct your cast right down parallel, or however you want to attack it.
Well, August is right around the corner, and I think early September, that first week is probably a similar pattern for muskies. You know me, man. If I've got an opportunity to throw a surface bait for muskies, I'm going to do it. And let's start with surface baits. You've taught me too that it doesn't have to be glass calm to throw a surface bait.
Oh no, absolutely. And I guess I'll just start with literally right now, the month of August, when that starts. To me, that's your best period for top water. Literally starting now, and basically runs up to turnover on our inland lake. So basically the end of September. That's prime time. And we all love the calm water stuff, and generally a lure like the Livingston Walking Boss, one of your favorites, is great for that. But just in
Do
general,
you have a walking boss handy? Do you
I
have one of
do.
those? Oh, good. No, this bait, folks, it really catches fish. I've caught quite a few muskies on it over the years, and I think what's so neat about that bait is it's like the old-fashioned jitterbug. It's fun to watch as it comes through the water.
Jitterbug lip, yeah. So you get a lot of plop plop, real deep sound, and then you get the jointed. When you get the right pace, these are clicking. You've also got the EBS technology, so you've got biologically recorded fish sounds as well. So you've got all kinds of sound there, and you know if you can hear it when you're getting that nice plop plop and the click click and all of that going on, and that bait is just deadly. And then there's a bunch of other types these days, but this is a tail bait. And of course, these are real popular too. And this is a noisier bait overall as far as spray and stuff. And when you talked about, you know, being able to get fish in the bigger waves, you and I have literally been bouncing
Yeah,
around in 6-foot rollers and have caught
exactly.
fish, and they will hit them, and they generally don't follow them and that stuff. They just blast it.
No, that is a really interesting comment right there. So the walking boss that you showed earlier, that's kind of for calm to maybe a little bit of wind,
yeah,
and you get the waves started rolling. You go to the prop type bait you just showed.
prop type bait I just showed, but I would recommend actually even a little bigger in that case. Basically, the bigger the waves, the bigger the bait body and the noise you want. So something like a big loud globe or something like that too.
Mm.
That'll ride those waves. Uh, we've we've actually caught fish on the Walking Boss in big waves as well, but it's a little slower. And the problem with the big wave situation is it's harder to control a slower moving bait, you know, because you're just naturally moving faster when you've got that much wind to deal with. The tail baits and some of the globes will still have good sound moving quite a bit faster. So overall, that's recommended. And we've sure caught a lot of fish on those over the years in the big waves.
Well, and I think, obviously the early morning or last light or even after dark, your surface baits are extremely effective. But in the middle of the day, I suppose you look for like the cloudy days, maybe a mist going or whatever to go to your surface baits.
Well, generally you want more humid type conditions. That's gonna be better, and generally darker skies. But I'll tell you what, I've well, heck, we filmed some real surprise, hot sunny calm too with a bait like that. Sometimes it'll get the Walking Boss specifically, you'll get a strike just out of the blue with something like that as well. But yeah, that's the kind of weather. Generally, you don't want a cold front. It's definitely not a top water deal once in a while, but usually it's pretty steady weather, especially if you've got a slow front coming in and you just feel the humidity. It's kind of muggy. The old guides referred to it as scoochy in the old days.
Gucci. I like
Feels
that.
scoochy. Yeah.
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 Uh, too, you can't forget the walking type baits, surface baits, little lower hooking percentage, but sometimes when fishing's tough, those I walk the dog type
Lighter.
baits,
Yeah.
they can actually get a fish at least to get interested, even when fishing's tough, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's definitely the only reason we generally don't go to it first is, like you say, it's a little worse on the hooking percentages unless you actually see the fish following and are able to get them to hit on a pause. Otherwise, they really blast it wildly at times and can miss. But that's a bait you definitely try when nothing else is working as well. And again, we look at everything from efficiency in the boat. So the other thing that's good this time of the year is bucktail spinners. I mean, there's nothing more efficient. So
Well, don't
inline
go there
spinners.
yet. I have one last question on the surface baits. You
Oh
can't
well,
just
okay. Well,
transition.
let's before you
You know,
forget.
I,
Let's
Well, yeah, no, and I might have just forgot what I was going to ask. No, in all seriousness, to end a surface bait discussion, and you and I've talked about this for many years, but you get a fish following, okay, on a steady retrieve type bait like the prop bait or even the walking boss, and he's waking behind it. Do you change your retrieve? What do you do?
That's a fairly complicated one to a certain extent. It's somewhat bait specific, but when you have a bait like a walking boss that just has that, that speed where it sounds the best with that plop plop, I'm going to generally keep that bait going at the same pace in that particular case, especially if I see him moving towards it. And they like to hit the walking boss from the side, so in a lot of cases they will actually swing out and kind of square up on it to come in from the side of the bait and hit it. So I'm going to keep it the same for a little while in that particular case, and then I'm going to wait until I get a little closer so I can zigzag it. By closer is usually 40 feet. You can start altering with the longer rods we use today. You can alter that straight path a little bit and make that bait do this. A lot of times that's going to trigger. And then the other thing is a speed up. And in the case of the walking boss, I've had a little bit of success actually just kind of pulling it. If not, it all depends on how long you've got the follow going on, but you try different things to make the fish react. So, a speed up, and in some cases a speed up and a stop with the walking boss.
Oh, really? A complete stop?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had them blast it sitting still a few times. Actually, one time when
Yeah.
I wasn't even planning, because I put the rod down to grab a sucker rod. In the meantime, a muskie hit the walking boss sitting still. I unfortunately didn't have the rod in my hand when that happened. But with the tail baits and like a bait that we've used for quite a few years, like a topper stopper with just two spinners on a more or less a buzzer type top water. Now with those, I'll generally fairly quickly, if that fish is following and closing, I'm going to speed up gradually and see how that fish reacts to that. I'm going to do that fairly quickly. And then something I know you personally have had success with, and I've seen a lot of it is taking those baits underneath the surface and actually
Mm-hmm.
before you get to the boat. Again, we're generally using longer rods these days, 9-foot rods. So when you're getting about 15 feet away, you can literally take that bait down. And in a lot of cases, you'll get a strike if you do it further from the boat like that. Right as it starts to go down, they'll just react to that,
Yeah.
and you won't even get into the figure eight. You're going to get a strike, and then subsurface figure eight with that. Now bait like the walking boss, I generally keep that right on top, right up to
Oh,
the
okay.
boat. Do the first turn, and then if that doesn't work, then I'll take the bait down. So
Okay. All
uh,
right. Well, August and even into September, surface baits work. And heck, I got to mention, I saw you catch a muskie in October on a surface bait up in Minnesota with me. So don't completely put them away,
oh no.
right?
And that's a little bit of a difference. Nothing's impossible. I've seen bucktails
Yeah.
work when the snow's coming down, and crazy stuff. But just in interest of the different strains, the spotted ones, Leech Lake strain or the Great Lakes strain, will tend to go a little later on top water than usually the Wisconsin strain fish are a little tougher. Once that turnover period hits, I wouldn't say knock it out. If you got a nice looking day, always try them. But definitely with the spotted strains, you can keep those going on the right looking days, and just try them right on into the fall. I mean, I know several people that have caught fish to 40-degree water temps, and we have
Wow.
as well in the cooler stuff. You're definitely beyond turnover, no doubt about it. You can still catch a fish.
Well, bucktails and spinners, they've been around as long as musky fishermen have. Um, I guess I don't know what you look at summertime. Are you slower retrieve, faster retrieve? Show us a bucktail if you got one there. And
Yeah,
I
this
mean,
is this is an inline bait here. They're
okay, now
most
that I can't
popular.
tell.
Huh? That's just one I
Okay.
made, I mean, but that's a Livingston sound bullet on there as well. But any, inline are generally the most popular. And you're going to basically, unless you get a day where the pattern is definitely something else, you start the day with somebody in the front of the boat with a bucktail or a spinnerbait. And it's just so efficient. It covers water. It just tends to work that time of year tremendously. And it's arguable, but it's the best hooking percentage bait and holding the fish on and actually being able to get it to the net with a bucktail. So it just makes all kinds of sense. Also probably the highest odds of getting a fish in the figure eight, which of course is exciting as well. But they just tend to really like bucktails at both sides. If you do a good figure eight or a circle at the side of the boat, they're just real effective there as well. So that should always be front of the boat type stuff, and until you get one of those weird days where it's been established through fish reaction that something else is working, which could be soft plastics, cranks, and jerk baits as well. And literally every lure comes into play this time of the year. But I would say that's definitely both topwater and spinners. It's the best time of the year for them. Overall, I would say you're going to be able to catch the majority of your fish on those two types of baits, unless you got a weird weather situation.
Well, it's interesting, over the years fishing with you guys. Our friend Rusty in Minnesota, he uses, the small bucktails all the time, and he reels them fast, even when the water temps in the low 40s. He's reeling 1 foot under the surface. Some guys reel slow to get the bucktail down deeper, or they have a weighted bucktail. Should you vary your retrieves?
Yeah, I would say Rusty has proven to us quite a few times that speed kills, and I would say it's like anything. You if you just if you fish a bucktail for 4 hours and all you're doing is burning it, and you're not having any action, in my opinion, you're an idiot. I mean, that's when you got to try different things. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a weighted bucktail, but definitely try slowing it down as well. I mean, you and I have talked over the years with just with Tex, how much time I've spent fishing with him.
Yeah.
He's the polar opposite of Rusty. He tends to reel quite a bit slower. And I can't tell you how many times over the years I'm literally thinking in my mind, gosh, I wish Dad would reel that faster. And about the time I'm thinking that, here it
Like
comes.
the night on, where were we? Up on Long-Legged Lake.
Ah,
And we were teasing him all day about his figure eights were crappy and this and that. And I think he caught like 4 muskies that night or that evening, and we couldn't get a bite. That was an orange and black bucktail, was it? I can't
yeah,
remember.
but it was just,
And
it
there
was
was
a
only one
fairly
of them, and yeah,
four
and the
fish.
one was a 50-incher, right? That he
Yeah,
caught that
well,
night.
not quite. I think it was 49, whatever. They're all,
Yeah,
they
but
get anywhere
reeling
near
slow
there,
though,
they're big.
reeling slow. But yeah, that's a really good illustration of what you were talking about right there. The different types of retrieve. Now the spinnerbait, you probably don't have one handy there, but
I did not
a,
bring one
sp-
in, but
a
yeah,
spinnerbait is really, really good for fishing different depths.
yeah.
I mean, you can fish that anywhere from 20 feet down to the top, right?
Yeah, you can essentially work it like a jig, and the nice thing is the blades will spin on the fall, and so
Right,
you could literally use it like a jig or just a steady retrieve they call slow rolling. That's just slow, and you're basically
right.
throwing it out. It's in a loop. You're letting it get way down, and then like a deep diving crankbait or something that it comes up. It's got kind of a nice angle too by the side of the boat, which sometimes is a trigger. So slow rolling can be real effective as well. And then the other thing about a spinner bait, everybody should have a spinner bait with single hooks as well. A lot of people don't have as much confidence in the single hooks. I I tend to. I think they're just as good.
Yeah,
They
me too.
basically never get away if you hook them. You can miss a fish, but for slop. But for heavy cover, those are going to go through better than an inline bucktail. You can generally throw them in real heavy cover with a single hook like that and be real effective with that. So yeah, they're just real versatile, and still to this day, I got to be honest, I probably don't use them as much as I should, but they're really
I
good
like it
baits
in
to throw.
fall too. I like that
Yeah,
in fall, that spinner bait.
yeah.
Okay, so when do you bulge? We call bulging is when you reel a bucktail fast and it's creating a bulge on the top of the water. That's probably a good warm water technique, I assume.
That's generally a good warm water technique, but oddly, to a certain extent, it's worn out in its effectiveness. It seems like after it got real popular about 15 years ago. So, what I generally suggest is, especially when it's calm, try it a little bit where you're actually pushing a little water. But I tend to more these days, just based out of fish reactions, it seems like I don't get as many strikes as I used to with just a straight bulge. So what I do recommend that as a tactic if you get a follower that you can see quite a ways out there. And then you
Okay.
bring it up to the top on a bulge. In a lot of cases, you'll get a hit there. And we're going off track just a little bit, but since it's on my mind and it's definitely a good technique, is a glider jerkbait. If you've got
We're
if you've
not
got a
there
fish,
yet. We cannot
you
interrupt
just let
my
me talk because it's a good point I might forget. So, but a glider
oh,
jerkbait is going like a foot or so underneath the surface, and you see one following it, and you try and do the same thing I just talked about with bulging the bucktail. You try and get your rod tip up and get that glider's back to break the surface a little bit. A lot of
okay.
times you'll trigger fish. Yeah.
Well, you really interrupted my train of thought. I have no idea where we're going next. Hey, I'm over 70, you can't interrupt me. No, I'm just kidding. The next thing I did want to talk about is something that you were not you alone, but you were one of the early guys to use tubes for muskies. And, probably what we're going back 15, 18 years ago. Do you have a tube handy by any chance?
I did not bring a tube. I should have a
Okay.
tube. I
Well,
have
a
one
tube,
soft plastic, but yeah, I mean, I think people know what tubes
yeah,
are, and yeah, the Red October tube is the one that we first started using back then, and it was kind of interesting because that was a vertical jigging bait only when it first came out,
right.
and I wired them. Myself and in a variety of ways, and left some very light so that you could basically work them right underneath the surface, and obviously mid depth and stuff as well. So
And it's a
yeah,
fun bait to use, isn't it? It's a fun bait to retrieve.
yeah, fun and frankly, for older guys, easy. They cast well, very little resistance, and essentially you're using them like a jerk bait. And then the other thing that we found to be effective these days, I kind of went all in on spinners for a little while, running spinners on the back of them. But now
Right.
I would really suggest having each type, and also I'll have replacement hooks with the spinner actually attached, so I could change one out real quickly if I say I had a hot color or whatever it might be. I could take me 2 seconds with a split ring pliers, and I can take a bare hook and switch it to a hook with a spinner right away. But what you're giving up there is without the spinner, you're going to get more of this nice side to side action, more or less a jerk bait type action. When you do put a spinner on, it reduces that. So you're not going to get as erratic side to side, but then you've got that spinner flash, and there's definitely patterns there. There's days where the spinners don't work as well, and there's days when that's what they want. They like that flash on the back end, and that's what you want to do. So you definitely want to have two types, and there's ways to add spinners to a variety of soft plastics actually. And I do have one. I got a whale tail here. This is just an example of a soft plastic bait like a
Okay.
tube. There's all kinds of different. There one of the first ones was bulldog and live action lure. There's so many different good baits out there now. The Chaos Medusa. We've done really well with this whale tail the last couple of. So there's a lot of different things you can do. with soft plastic. So you should have a variety of them, and you should have a variety of different weights or the ability to add weight, so you can cover the water column differently. You want to have something like a Red October tube that's very, very light, that you can work right over the top of real skinny weeds and even some slop, and then all the way on down to something pretty heavy weighted that you can more or less work like a jig, to the point of even vertical jigging as well, so you can use them throughout the water column.
Yeah, that was the last question on the tube. That's one of the things that I like. If you're fishing a real deep weed edge or a deep break line, you know, you can cast up into the weeds and then let it drop and work it on the weed edge. I like the versatility of that, covering the different areas of the water column.
Oh yeah, they really are a versatile bait, and it's something neither you or I like to do with my bad back and your bad shoulder, but you know, it's real effective to rip them through weeds. If it's really tough out there, you know, and especially if you get this, not fun to do it on a hot, sunny, calm day, but well, I'll tell you what, there's always fish in the weeds, and you know, if you aggressively rip those baits and let them drop hard, that can get you fish. I've seen it happen so many times where nothing else is working, and just that aggressive action of ripping through weeds and fast drop can get fish to hit.
Well, let's move on now to one of the baits that you've caught an awful lot of fish on in the last several years is that Livingston jerk bait. Do you have one of those by any chance there?
I think I did do that. Yeah, this is
Okay.
this is a jerk master. This is a little modified with a spinner. I just add that on to be able to actually, it helps the bait stay a little shallower, and
Okay.
obviously adds a little flash as well. So we've the regular jerk master is about a 5-foot bait. And then with the spinner and a little less weight in it, you know, this is about a 2-foot bait right here. But tremendous side to side action. Obviously, you've got the EBS technology as well for pauses. I always recommend a lot of pauses, and you know, just getting that erratic action with different cadences, and always making sure that you leave a couple of more extended pauses during the retrieve. And then, just like I mentioned with the tube soft plastics period, it is a good bait that you can actually rip through weeds as well, you know, with that same idea of trying to trigger fish with that contact situation. So
Well, I want to emphasize one thing you said there, the pause. I was with Rob, our buddy over in Vilas County last fall, and watching you do the rip pause, that really works. I mean, I did a rip pause, and I let it pause for about 3 or 4 seconds. That's a long time on a reel, 3 or 4 seconds, you know?
Just talked about.
Fish! I got him! I got him, Rob! I got him, Rob! I saw him bite, Rob! I saw him bite, Rob! I got him, Rob! Get him in the net, Rob! Get him in the net! Get him in the net!
Fish! Big one! Get him towards me!
Yeah!
Yes!
Yeah! So you know how I'm working that bait? Rip, long pause. And a pause. Are you all right down here?
Yeah. All right.
On the long pause, Rob, I actually watched that fish come up and grab it.
I believe you.
Oh, is that cool, buddy? Take a look at the net there, folks, and you can see how that fish T-boned that bait. And that is a good sign. When they T-bone a sucker, that means you're gonna hook them. Oh my gosh!
There you go.
Oh, that is a heavy fish. Look at that muskie. Holy cow. Was that an awesome sequence there, folks? Rob's been on me to cast, and I did, and now Blake wants to cast.
That's all right.
Yeah, but is that how big is this?
It's 47.
47-inch muskie. And what was that bait again?
The Livingston jerk master.
And you know what about?
And I saw this head come up and eat that bait, and that was so cool. But the pause on the rip deal is crucial on those type of baits, isn't it?
well, you can't say always. Sometimes you'll just be jerking it like crazy, and they'll hit then. But the pause is amazing, John, and that's all species. You know, we go back to to spring. And actually, I can go back to a few days ago fishing with Tex. Still, believe it or not, we had over, I don't even know if I told you that over the phone, but we had like 25 crappies hit a regular, the smaller jerk master that we use for the walleyes and bass.
Oh, wow.
And amazingly, on that particular day, that was a pause deal as well. Those crappies were waiting for the pause to hit. I mean, Tex said it as well. I switched him over to a jerk master too. We were both using it because it was, you had a chance of catching crappies, but of course everything else as well. So why throw a crappie plastic when you can do that? But it was interesting. Right. We got talking about it because we're literally catching enough crappies to pattern them, and the strikes were coming on pause. And so that happens with the bass.
How big were they? How big were the crappies?
They're 12 to 15s. That's a nice thing when you're catching them on
you didn't even call me when you're catching 12 to 15-inch crappies?
I've told you I catch them on it. You've actually seen it a few times, but it's interesting. In the summer, it almost seems like they're more aggressive.
Where were they? On a weed edge?
Yeah, weeds, deeper side mainly. But
man, that sounds like fun, dude.
Oh yeah,
I love muskie fishing, but crappies are, well, you know me and crappies. All right. Size of the jerk baits. There's been times like when you and I have been over on Leech Lake, and the smaller jerk baits work good there. So how do you? There's all different sizes, right? Where do you start with the muskie? I mean, some are 4 inches long, some are 10 inches long.
Well, yeah, typically as you get later in the year, bigger's better. But that's
bigger's better. Okay.
Yeah, the right way to answer that question is exactly how I answered the bucktail one. In the warmer water, generally speed is good, but with the size of the crankbaits, it's based on the propensity for the body of water. So, for instance, on Leech Lake, we don't know why, but in a lot of cases, they like smaller baits there, even at supposed big bait time. We've seen the same thing with the Bay of Green Bay muskies as well. They're just they like smaller stuff. So if you're on a body of water there, you might wanna start with a 6 or maybe an 8 as the bigger bait that you'd want to try. But in a lot of cases, they tend to just like the bigger baits, and I would say the average size would be 9-10 inches you'd want to start with. But here again, just like the speed on the bucktail, when you decide to try a crankbait, keep switching around. Give it maybe a half hour with a smaller one, and then try one a little bigger. And obviously your cadences and your pauses and all those different things. And the big key is to be paying attention to what the heck you were doing. A lot of people don't do that. And I understand it. You're fishing long days and whatever, and you finally get a bite and you're celebrating, and it's easy to not ponder what you were doing, but that you really want to ponder. Was it a faster retrieve? Was it super erratic? Was it on the pause? All these different things. And, it could be a bait that sinks a little more. And was it on the drop, or was it a buoyant crankbait? And it was rising up when those are all things you want to think about. And one thing I notice about Rusty when he's using that 6-inch headhunter that he's so effective with in the fall. Now, technically, in a lot of cases, we're fishing in September. That should be big bait time. And he kicks butt with that little Livingston headhunter. And he lets it drop more than most people. That the other two models float. The 8 inches more or less neutral, and the 10 inches more buoyant, but the 6-inch sinks. And I've noticed a lot of Rusty strike actually come on that pause, so the bait's making a little noise, but it's also sinking. That's when he gets a lot of his strikes. And that's the kind of stuff that you really want to pay attention to when you got a strike, what you were doing, and was the bait falling and pausing, or whatever it may be.
Well, too, the Suick type baits I want to talk about a little bit. And, to me, when I started muskie fishing years ago, I put a black Suick on in the beginning of the year and took it off in November. I use the same bait every day, not probably because I couldn't afford any other ones. But no, seriously, I ran. I mean, that was the bait. I probably caught a fish on it, caught 2 fish on it in a year or whatever. But I've always thought of that more as a fall type bait, those type of baits. But they're good in the summer months too.
Oh, you just always
The
try 'em.
Suick type baits.
Yeah, they're not here again. This time of the year, I'm going to lead with a bucktail, no doubt about it. But yeah, all season, and really a Suick's pretty amazing bait when you think about it. For how long it's been around, and it has never really trailed off. There's something about that dive and rise type bait, and I always say technically the tail and the back is for adjusting your depth to make it run shallower or deeper, but it's also flash, especially on more sunny days. So it's just everything's arguable, but I would say over the past decades, I don't know if any bait's actually caught more fish, and that style of bait is just really good, and frankly, that's why Livingston, they came out with that flipper bait, which is essentially
Right.
a jerk master with the metal tail as well. The same concept, giving you a little more flash. So it's extremely effective, and something that should always be tried. And typically this time of the year, I'm going to say that should be the type of thing towards the back of the boat, and the top water and bucktail up front. But you're going to get your days, and typically they're maybe a cold front day or a little more off day, that they're going to work better than the bucktail on top water.
And you can use them in a lot of different depths too.
Oh yeah,
That you can use. I've seen you throw that in 2 feet of water. Those
oh
type of
yeah.
baits.
Well,
So
that's the thing about dive and rise. If they're buoyant,
yeah,
you can get them to go down and hit the weed and back up out of it.
yeah. Well, before we go, I want to talk too about water temperature in the month of August. If we know we've got, usually in August, we're going to have several days in the 90s, and you're going to see your water temps climb up to 78, maybe even 80 degrees. You actually don't musky fish when the water temps get too warm, right?
No, I suggest that it's tough. We've always said 80 over the years, and I think it's the most critical though. You can get a day, John, where you can literally, if it's sunny and calm, that top foot warms up 5 degrees sometimes, but that's just the top
Right.
foot. That's not as bad. So I always want to emphasize it's when that top 6 feet or so at least is all hot, and that's usually after an extended period, and that's when I would suggest not fishing at all. But the big point is, the warmer it gets, the more critical it is for the fish. So every degree, you can't just pick a temperature like 75 or whatever.
Right.
With any of this, when it's over 70, you got to start being more careful, and the more it clicks up, and especially if it's been an extended period of time and that whole top layer is hot, it's really just not worth fishing for them anymore. I think, because it's so critical. You could be fishing them and all water release, and that's what I would suggest in the upper 70s and 80s. Just you absolutely have to minimize the time out of the water. But from speaking with guys that know, that have actually, our fisheries biologists, and maybe even more importantly, I have several buddies who have been in charge of running hatcheries in the north and the south, and basically, these guys say their most important job is mitigating stress, and understanding those things, when it gets that hot, and how they're dealing with fish in all different ways. And one of the first things you'll learn is, you don't mess with them when it's hot, and any of your experimental type stuff is always done in cool water, and they're more susceptible to any kind of bacteria and anything else that gets on. So that's why you want to little things like slime removal and getting them cut up in the net if you've got a bad net that cuts their tail and all of it. When you add stress to that, it literally brings, like you talk about us when we catch a cold or whatever. It's when your immune system is down. You've got the combination of maybe you haven't been sleeping much and maybe you're stressed and all these different things. That's when your immune system is down. That's when we're most likely to get sick and have a problem. It's the same thing with the fish. So you get a combination of this real hot water, which stresses them out. You have a fairly long fight. Somebody's got it maybe hooked bad or something like that, or they just don't pay attention to what we say about warnings of hot water. And they go through this long routine of release where they're measuring the fish in the boat and they're holding up photos for 30 seconds and all of that, and I understand the celebration and all of that, but that's what kills the fish. So now you've got a fish that maybe flopped around the boat a little bit, it wiped off slime, it got cut off in the net, and then it's been unable to breathe for how long? Over a minute. And additional stress, that fish normally survives in 60-degree water, but in the real hot water, it does not. And that's what he says happened. They actually get some little infections that otherwise they would easily get through, but because they're stressed and the water's hot, it kills them later. Sometimes it kills them right away, but the delayed mortality generally is, anywhere from a half a day to 7 days. It can actually occur if it's going to happen. That's usually the time frame it occurs in. And it is just plain and simple for all species. I don't care if it's walleyes, crappies, bluegills, muskies. You see the most dead fish floating around. When if you were getting paid $100,000 per dead fish to find when do you go hunting for dead fish floating, you go when the water's hot. That it's really, really pretty easy to see, and so you just want to be more careful and absolutely reduce that time out of the water and handling when the water gets real hot, and then when it gets too hot, you swim or fish for bass.
Yeah. All right. I guess to sum it up, and we're going to close here, but you're in a boat with three guys. You want to lead with a bucktail, right? In the front of the boat, and the guy in the middle can try what?
The guy in the middle,
jerk bait.
They try jerk bait, crankbait, soft plastic. A guy in the back, top water, but maybe in the middle too. And here again, that's a little bit more of definitely a glider style top water. I would put that in the back just because of low odds, but it might trigger a fish when nothing else will. But towards the back of the boat, technically, is more experimentation. That should be more of a lure type changer, much more so than the person in the front. Changer of angles. You should always change your angles a little bit. We do get in the pattern of just casting straight out. And, I talked earlier about different weed types. If you can see that visually with your polarized glasses and, trying different angles to see if that can make a difference with different baits, banging structure, all of those different things. But usually this time of the year, it's front of the boat is the most effective bait. And then if you get a pattern of something really working good, I mean, a certain type of bucktail or color or something, you could hopefully get to a period where there's, two people throwing a very similar lure, or if there's a real hot topwater bait, you might as well get it up in the front of the boat. And, at that point, if you patterned it that day, but you start out with the bucktail, maybe the topwater, jerkbait, crankbait here, soft plastic, and then, the topwater back there. And obviously you got a little bit to rotate around, but again, the person in the back should be the big experimenter.
All right, my friend. Well, nice to chat with you. And I learned a lot about muskie fishing today. From you. I'm very, very happy. Yeah. Want to thank our friends at AMSOIL. They do a lot for us, and they're a great company, and they make great product. And you probably want to go fishing now, huh?
Well, I think I will. Yeah.
All right. See you later, man.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Take care.